Energy madness and a go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This podcast is called Energy Madness. We have no dumbest bill in America, but we do have a go woke or go broke. First up, Treasury nominee wants to starve the fossil fuel industry. That's right. Biden's Treasury nominee wants to literally starve the fossil fuel industry. In other words, put it out of business. It's why we're calling this energy madness. Normally, no political appointee, normally no elected officials would be so stupid as to admit that this is what they want to do. And I know myself as an elected official, you will never, almost never hear an individual be so stupid as to admit that they want prices to go so high that they will run an entire industry out of business. We're going to talk about exactly what that means in a minute and what the ultimate purpose and goal is of these Marxists. So in the Daily Caller, the article is Biden's Marxist Treasury nominee, Saul Amarova, it's a lady, wants to bankrupt or starve the fossil fuel industry to tackle climate change. President Joe Biden's nominee for a key Treasury Department role admitted that oil, natural gas, and coal firms need to go bankrupt to prevent climate change, a resurfaced video showed. We have a clip on this. And we're going to talk about this at length. First up, here is that clip from this nominee of Joe Biden as the Treasury Secretary. Here's the clip.
For certain troubled industries and firms that are in transitioning. And here what I'm thinking about is primarily coal industry and oil and gas industry. A lot of the smaller players in that industry are going to probably go bankrupt in short order. At least we want them to go bankrupt if we want to tackle climate change, right?
So what is missing from that conversation? Pretty much all of the detail of what the virtue signaling that she's trying to give to all of the left and the progressives and the Marxists in the United States and across the globe. What's missing is what will happen to the everyday American citizen as a result of what she is proposing. So here's her thought process. Well, first, she's suggesting that as the result of gas prices, oil prices, natural gas prices, as a result of and coal prices, of course, all of those energy components, fossil fuels, going up in price, costs you more and more to heat your house, costs you more and more to fill up your tank of your car. As a result of them continuously spiking in price, at some point, you're going to put solar panels on your house. You're going to put a wind turbine in your backyard, or you're going to buy an electric car. And as a result of that happening en masse in the United States, a couple 100 million people doing it at the same time, in her mind, that means no one will be buying natural gas or coal or oil or gasoline, and therefore those particular companies will go bankrupt. And she's literally suggesting that that is a good thing. So think about how we transition from one industry to another in the United States. It happens very gradually, and it happens gradually for a reason, right? It happens gradually because you need to retrain people. You need to, of course, in normal times, give people choices of what they want to do. And I will speak for myself. I've driven an electric car. I don't own one, but I've driven one. And I thought it was a pretty amazing piece of engineering. I thought it was very uncomfortable to sit in because it was so low to the ground and your knees are like higher than your waist. So for me, it wasn't something that I was interested in. I also thought it was really expensive. So that was kind of a non-starter. I also like the actual pickup of combustible engine cars, but I have to admit the electric car that I drove also had a very good pickup as well. Misses the point. Isn't it my decision what I buy? Isn't it my decision as to how I want to live my life? And why don't we allow the marketplace to fix these things? So if you are one of those individuals in the United States who is terrified of climate change, which apparently includes everything, if you're one of those individuals, then do you own an electric car? Do you own and have solar panels on your house? Do you have a wind turbine in your backyard? Do you have backup batteries in your basement or in your house or in your garage? Do you have all of those things? And here's my thought. Until you have skin in the game and you have those things, then you really probably shouldn't tell everybody else what they need to do when you haven't done it yourself. And herein lies the problem. So we have somebody who is a nominee. She's a Marxist by Biden, and she was the nominee and still is the nominee for Treasury Secretary. And she's saying that we should tackle climate change by bankrupting gasoline firms, you know, the gasoline that you put in your car, natural gas firms, the natural gas that you use to do everything from have grilling things outside to heating your home, coal, and of course, what was the last one? Gas, coal, natural gas, one more. She wants to get, oil, of course, oil. She wants to get rid of all of those. And she wants to do it right now. Now, what would that do to the economy? Well, it would crash the United States economy. We would be going from the 21st century pretty much back to the mid 19th century, if that were to happen. And this is the problem with ideologues. Ideologues don't care about regular people. They don't care about the consequences of their actions. All they care about is getting to the promised land of absolute and utter control. Because naturally, this lady is going to still be taking private jets, just like all of the other special people in government. In all Marxist economies, you ever notice? The people that are the richest are the people that are in government. Everybody else, they're serfs. And that is why podcast listeners, we're calling this podcast Energy Madness, because when you go to the pump to put gasoline in your car, it is intentional that the prices are higher. It's not just a consequence of COVID. It has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with policy decisions. This is intentional. They want you to stop driving, period. It's not only just that they want you to drive an electric car. They want you to just stop driving. They want you to stay home because they feel like human beings are a scourge on the earth. And since human beings are a scourge on the earth, they should definitely stop driving altogether and certainly never, ever drive a combustible vehicle or never, ever have natural gas heating their home or oil heating their home. And so, as a result of these idiotic policies, the new report that came out today, just a few hours ago, inflation surges to its highest level in 30 years. Now, we did a podcast, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago about this, where we played clips of Jimmy Carter. We're not going to be playing those again, but really, when we had inflation, hyperinflation in the United States, it was during the Carter years. And the Democrats were wiped out, of course, in the next election because Carter kept trying to explain away inflation. And to be fair, in some instances back then, inflation was a result of way too much spending, military spending in particular, during the Vietnam War. Today, we have way too much spending. Across the board, way too much spending. And we have an administration that wants to cancel oil and cancel fossil fuels. So inflation has surged to its highest level in 30 years. The consumer price index increased 0.9% in October, bringing the key inflation indicators year over year increase to 5.2% as supply shortages continue and demand grows, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics announced Wednesday. So, how do supply shortages of energy, how do you have supply shortages of energy, when you have an economy that is energy independent? How's that possible? And of course, the Biden administration will say, well, it's because of COVID. Oh, no. No, it's because they're canceling pipelines. They're doing everything they can to make it difficult. They're shaking down the oil industry. They're doing everything they can to stop supply of oil and natural gas. So the year-over-year inflation figure is an increase from September's 5.3% level, marking the highest level in 30 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics report. Economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal projected the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, would increase to just 5.9% in October. And so CNBC Now says, breaking, Consumer Price Index surges 6.2% in October, worse than expected and highest since December of 1990. And of course, they have a picture of $5 gasoline in their tweet. The Core Price Index, which excludes volatile categories like food and energy. I gotta love this, right? The Core Price Index, which excludes volatile categories like food and energy, jumped 0.6% in October, an increase from September's 2% figure, according to BLS. Yeah, so who cares about the Core Price Index because it excludes food and energy, and you can't live without food and energy. So I kind of love the government when they do this. I don't think we're moving into a new phase where inflation is broader and where things are going to get a little more intense. Laura Rosner Warburton, senior economist at Macro Policy Perspectives, told the WSJ, quote, part of that reflects the supply chain bottlenecks are not resolved going into the holiday season when a lot of purchases get made and the economy is doing really well. So you have strong demand. Oh, sure. So you know what? Markets react to policymakers when they make stupid statements, like the policymaker who is the potential Treasury nominee of Biden, when they say, yeah, we just want to starve fossil fuel industry and we want them to go bankrupt. Markets react to that. And when markets react to that, they drive up what? The prices of energy. And since energy is used, as we said many times in the past, for all things in the economy, everything from growing food to making all products, well, then everything gets more expensive. And if that isn't enough with the energy madness economy, we're going to transition into good old Adam Schiff. Shifty Shift gets shift on The View. So Adam Schiff is on The View, podcast listeners. And if you know Congressman Adam Schiff, he's the guy from California, the progressive. I think he went to Harvard. He's certifiable. And he spent 4 years on national TV, primarily CNN and MSNBC and ABC, CBS and NBC, saying for 4 years that Donald Trump was not elected president of the United States, that he stole the election, and that Donald Trump was helped by Russia and colluded with them to steal the election, among other things. This is what Adam Schiff said. Now, it'd be very clear, podcast listeners, because YouTube and other platforms have a policy that we can't talk about stealing the election unless it's in the context of what someone else said. Well, this is in that context. Adam Schiff said repeatedly for 4 years, and I know that you remember this, how Donald Trump stole the election, and he did so by colluding with Russia. So fast forward, we have various individuals who are being charged with crimes by falsifying the Steele dossier, which of course was completely falsified and the FBI still accepted it and so forth. And you know all that information. Well, Schiff goes on The View. He goes on The View and he decides to start out completely and utterly virtue signaling. And who does he run into? Well, former Trump administration and State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus was on The View as one of their guests, and she clearly made House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff uncomfortable when she pressed him on Tuesday about his promotion of the debunked Steele dossier. Last week, Special Counsel John Durham charged Igor Danchenko with 5 counts of lying to the FBI. Now, you might say to yourself, well, why does that matter, right? Why does the FBI get so upset when you lie to them when they're interviewing you? And here, podcast listeners, is a good reason. Okay? The reason you shouldn't lie to the FBI is because when you're sitting in front of the FBI and you're telling them that you have a dossier that is real and that you're Igor Danchenko and you're Russian living in the United States, and you're telling them that Donald Trump is coordinating with the Russian government to steal the election, among other things, and you lie repeatedly to the FBI to get them to investigate the Trump campaign during the election, well, that's probably a good reason why you should be charged with lying to the FBI. That's why you shouldn't do it. Okay, now I agree with you, podcast listeners. The FBI has its issues. We all know what those issues are. But there's a reason that that law exists when you sit down with the FBI. And here now we're seeing it. Because you could take any kind of allegation and lie to the FBI and falsify a bunch of documents and do so in a very professional way and convince the FBI to potentially open up an investigation on someone when there shouldn't be ever an investigation opened up. And that is exactly what happened here. So Morgan Ortagus, she is a former State Department spokesman for the Trump administration. She was on The View. Okay. So she's on The View and she has an opportunity, along with the other members of The View, to ask Adam Schiff questions. Now, of course, the other members of The View were just, oogling over Adam Schiff. They just thought he was a rock star. He's a rock star because he took down Donald Trump. That's the way they see it, that he accepted it, that he was just wonderful in what he did, that it's okay to take someone down, even if it's all a lie and even if you are trying to destroy them. That's the way most of the people in The View think, but not Morgan Ortagus. So shifty Adam Schiff virtue signals first on The View and talks about how we must learn how to accept elections. Here's the guy that wouldn't accept the Trump election in 2016 and for 4 years worked to undermine Donald Trump with false information. You knew he was coordinating with Hillary Clinton. You knew Adam Schiff was having many phone calls with Hillary Clinton. And I wouldn't be surprised if the FBI was even listening to those calls, knowing full well that all of this was nonsense and BS. So first up, we have a series of 4 clips, pretty awesome clips. And here's Adam Schiff virtue signaling how we must learn to accept elections, especially Republicans. Here's the clip.
They are repeatedly glorifying violence. And it's not as if this is without the backdrop of the violence of January 6th. And in fact, when they go out and they spread this big lie about the election, and they tell Americans basically, we can't trust our elections anymore, any election we lose is rigged, they're basically saying, if we can't rely on elections to decide who governs, then what's left but violence? And that's just dangerous.
Very. So that, can you believe that? That's Adam Schiff on The View. And of course, you got Joy Behar going, that's right, and they're all agreeing. Not Morgan Ortagus, of course. We're going to get to that in a minute. But Adam Schiff is saying they, as in the Republicans, that's who the they he's referring to are. They cannot accept elections. They need to learn how to do that. And we, as an American people, need to learn how to accept the elections. And it's very dangerous with the insurrection when you have to find it necessary to have an insurrection because you didn't accept the election, says the guy who didn't accept the Trump election for 4 years. I am just beside myself that no one questions this guy. I'm just beside myself. And And if there's ever someone in my mind who really should be grilled in an interview by really solid reporters, it's Adam Schiff. But he has managed somehow to escape any kind of accountability for what he did for 4 years to the Trump administration. Remember, you're not really just doing this to Trump because, you're doing it to the entire administration and you're undermining the will of the people. So Adam Schiff actually was talking about what he actually did himself, which is to undermine the will of the people. And he wonders why people were so angry at the 2020 election when a president from 2016 didn't even have an opportunity to properly serve for 4 years because of Adam Schiff. So the next clip, this sets up what's really going to happen in this interview on The View. Remember, Morgan Ortagus is the other person you're going to hear in this interaction. And we have that clip in. Here it is.
So I want to ask you about something that's in the news a lot right now. You've been really prolific over the past few years being the head of the Intel Committee, and you defended, promoted, you even read into the congressional record the Steele dossier. And we know last week the main source of the dossier was indicted by the FBI for lying about most of the key claims in that dossier. Do you have any reflections on your role in promoting this to the American people?
So remember, that is Morgan Ortagus who asked that question. She is the former spokesperson for the State Department under President Donald Trump. I'm sure you recognize that voice. She was on The View. She asked that question. Solid question. Like, hey, Adam Schiff, you read into the record the Steele dossier. I mean, you literally read it into the record because to you it was real. And you stood by all of that information, even during the late date in the Trump presidency when you knew it wasn't so. Do you have any, regrets in doing that? And the next clip, we have Adam Schiff giving an answer. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, first of all, whoever lied to the FBI or lied to Christopher Steele should be prosecuted, and they are. And unlike in the Trump administration, if they're convicted, they should go to jail, not be pardoned. So Donald Trump pardoned Roger Stone for lying. He pardoned Michael Flynn for lying. If people lied to the FBI, they should go to jail. But at the beginning of the Russia investigation, I said that any allegations should be investigated. We couldn't have known, for example, people were lying to Christopher Steele. So it was proper to investigate them. And let's not forget what we learned in that investigation. We learned that the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was giving internal polling data, campaign polling data, to Russian intelligence while Russian intelligence was helping the Trump campaign.
And to be clear, he was fired halfway through the campaign.
Well, he may have been fired,
yeah,
but the effort to get Russian help continued, and even beyond the effort to get Russian
So there you go. There's Adam Schiff. It's always Russia, Russia, Russia. At this late date, podcast listeners, you still have Adam Schiff, who continues to say those words, Russia, 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 Trump, Russia, 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 Russia. This guy is ahead of the House Intelligence Committee. Can you imagine what awful shape our country is with this idiot in charge who doesn't really care about keeping the U.S. safe? All he cares about is undermining presidents of the United States, then finds out that there are people who are actually angry that he has undermined the president of the United States. And then those people go march on Washington, and he's shocked that people are angry after 4 years of hearing him in particular talking about this. I mean, how can you possibly be shocked as a politician when all you don't talk about policy or making the country better? You literally are all about destroying an individual's presidency, which in part could potentially destroy the United States of America, certainly destroys the people's confidence in elections. And Schiff is number one on the list for doing just that. And if you think for one moment, podcast listeners, that he hasn't been then and now still coordinating with the Clinton people, you're out of your mind. Completely and utterly coordinating with them. This is why everybody was so afraid and continues to be afraid of Bill and Hillary Clinton, because these are really dangerous people. These are people that if you do them wrong, they're going to find some way to completely and utterly destroy your career. So you heard that question that Morgan Ortegas asked, and we have the final clip in this series. I just want to prepare you to let you know why you can't. If you're watching the podcast, you can see this, but if you're just listening, you can't. Schiff is visibly shaken up. Adam Schiff is visibly shaken up from this question. He's shocked that anyone could ask him a question and try to hold him accountable, because in his district in California, it is so incredibly blue. He's never asked questions by his constituents like this. He never puts himself in that position. And we have a crooked media that isn't interested whatsoever in learning about the Steele dossier and what actually happened over those 4 years with trying to undermine this presidency. So Schiff isn't used to it. He's visibly shaken up. We have this final clip. You'll love the way it ends. Here it is.
But you may have helped
also
spread Russian
sought to get-
disinformation yourself for years by promoting this. I think that's what Republicans and what people who entrusted you as the Intel Committee chair are so confused about your culpability in all of this.
Well, I completely disagree with your premise. It's one thing to say allegations should be investigated, and they were. It's another to say that we should have foreseen in advance that some people were lying to Christopher Steele, which is impossible, of course, to do. But let's not use that as a smokescreen to somehow shield Donald Trump's culpability for inviting Russia to help him in the election, which they did, for trying to coerce Ukraine into helping him in the next election, which he did, into inciting an insurrection, which he did. None of that is undercut. None of that serious misconduct is in any way diminished by the fact that people lied to Christopher Steele.
No, I think just your credibility is.
Well, I think the credibility of your question is in doubt.
So there's Adam Schiff. He's shocked that someone is questioning his credibility. It's like, no, it's got to be the question of the credibility of your question. It's like, in other words, you're not allowed to ask me questions that actually caused me to have to answer for my actions over 4 years. And not to mention, Schiff was so incredibly shaken that he said, the word erection during the response and people like Adam Schiff usually don't make those mistakes because podcast listeners, they're never challenged. They're never actually challenged. And when they are challenged in an open forum by honest people trying to get to the truth once and for all, which would actually cause our country to heal, our country would heal a great deal if all of this information came out and we were all told exactly what happened. And the more that we are told by this, the more that we discover, the better it is for the country, and the more that we question the Adam Schiffs of the world who coordinated and made our country incredibly divided, and to this day says, well, Republicans can't accept elections, when in fact, he himself is the one who can't accept elections. So next up, podcast listeners, Virginia Democrats walk back their concession. You heard that correctly. So this is brand new. The Virginia Democrats lost the House of Delegates in Virginia. They conceded that they lost the House of Delegates in Virginia. They were shellacked in last Tuesday's election. But they've decided to take back their concession and now are pushing for recounts in 2 seats. I can't make this up. So last week, and this is the Gateway Pundit, we reported that the results of the Virginia House election resulted in the Republicans regaining the House for the first time in years. But they may have been premature. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch, of all papers, is reporting that Democrats are now holding back their concession of the Virginia House to the Republicans. Days after Democrats conceded control of the Virginia House of Delegates to Republicans, they walked back that concession as 2 key races in which the GOP holds razor-thin leads appeared headed for recounts. Interesting, right? You just heard Adam Shifty Schiff, right? Just heard him knowing that he can't accept elections, wouldn't accept it for 4 years. And now we have the Virginia Democrats who are saying, well, the elections were close. So even though we won and the elections were close, maybe we actually didn't really lose. I mean, can you make this stuff up? So days after Democrats conceded control to the Virginia House of Delegates to Republicans, they walked back their concession. As of Tuesday, vote counts show Republicans with 50 seats and holding slight leads in 2 additional seats that still have not been called by the AP or Associated Press. Democrats have 47 seats and are leading in 1 other district that has not been called. In both districts where Republicans are leading, the margins are under 5%, which allows candidates to request state-funded recounts. In District 91, Democrat incumbent delegate Martha Mugler conceded to Republican challenger A.C. Cardoza Friday. Mugler's concession was quickly followed by a statement from Democrat House Speaker Eileen Filler-Corn, quite the name, hyphen too, by the way, Eileen Filler-Corn. Okay, who acknowledged that with Mugler's concession, the Republicans had control of the House with 51 seats. But Mugler walked back her concession over the weekend after final absentee and provisional ballots were tallied and Cardoza's lead shrunk to just 94 votes out of 27,388 votes counted. So there you have it. The election was close in those 2 races, but the Democrats still lost. But they can't accept the election. So what are they going to do? They're going to try to do everything they can to find votes. And podcast listeners, have you ever noticed how you find votes in close elections? You find them through absentee ballots. You find them through mail-in voting. That's why Democrats love mail-in voting, because whenever they have mail-in voting, they are always able to find just the right number of ballots. Now, you can't find those ballots cast from the day of voting when you actually vote on the day of voting and in-person voting. In-person voting, pretty much impossible to be able to suddenly find extra ballots. But mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, all day long, you can find them. And so you have, on the one hand, Adam Schiff saying, oh, no, I mean, Democrats don't try to overturn elections. We just don't do that. It was Trump. It was Russia, Trump. And now you have the Virginia Democrats doing just that. And so there's another House Democrat who's saying there are doomsday predictions on the party divide. If we don't hang together, we will hang separately. So that's Representative Jerry Connolly, also a Democrat from Virginia. He's a congressman. Made a gloom prediction for the Democrat Party's electoral future Monday as he implored the moderates and progressives within the party to come together and bridge the stark divide between them. During his appearance on MSNBC's Deadline White House, Connolly argued the last week's Republican victory in Virginia's gubernatorial race showed Democrats were headed for enormous trouble in the 2022 midterms. Well, we all know that. And this guy is quite a tool. He's a lefty himself. And as a result of that, he knows firsthand that his leftist philosophy is not being accepted by the people in the state of Virginia. Remember, we had the gubernatorial election and the legislative elections in Virginia. Now, in 2022, you're going to have, of course, every member of Congress up in Virginia, and they're terrified. They're terrified because they realize that entire swaths of territory within their congressional districts just turned red. And people were elected to the Virginia House of Delegates from districts that were previously blue. And so haven't they gotten the message that it's their policies that are doing this? It's the inflationary policies. It's their inability to properly manage the economy. It's their stupidity on school boards. And speaking of which, podcast listeners, the South Carolina in particular, School Boards Association voted to withdraw from the National School Boards Association effective immediately. And I'm sure you know why that happened, because the National Association of School Boards basically said that parents are, domestic terrorists. Parents who dared question their school boards are domestic terrorists and must be taken out by the KGB. And so, as a result, the South Carolina School Boards Association have said, you know what? As a result of the letter coming from the School Boards Association at the national level, we just don't want to participate. We think it's just not worth our while to even be involved whatsoever. So, voters, as a result, prefer Republican candidates. And that's by 8%. We briefly talked about that yesterday. So Republicans have an R plus 8 on the generic ballot. That means that across the country, every Republican congressional district has an R plus 8, like an 8-point lead. And that would be absolutely bedlam to the Democrat Party. And they're terrified. And why are they terrified? Well, they're terrified because I'm not sure let's face it. I'm not sure. Do they even know why they're behind? Do they even understand? Do they even know? I mean, Chris, do you think they understand? I don't think they do. I don't think the Democrats even know why they're so unpopular now. I mean, when was the last time the Democrats actually offered a policy that helped to lift all Americans in a way that was inspirational rather than trying to buy them off with federal money? When was that last time? I don't remember. And if you think for a moment that these stimulus plans are that answer, then what the heck good is a stimulus plan that gives you free money when you're having to use all that free money anyway to keep up with inflation that they're causing? Ask yourself that question. And also, it's because Democrats don't know how to manage cities. So here's an example of how bad they are at managing cities. A puppy dies from a rat disease in New York City. Here's what other pet owners need to know. This is in Fox News. So Roxy Zafar only had her puppy Disco for 10 days before he became sick with leptospirosis and died days later. Now she wants other pet owners to be aware of the disease so they don't experience the same loss. Zafar, 34 years old, lives in Upper West Side, New York, in Manhattan, and told Fox News that she had never heard of leptospirosis until last month when Disco, her dog, contracted the disease. According to the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, leptospirosis is a bacterial disease that can affect animals and humans and is spread through the urine of infected animals. Ugh. In New York City, the most common culprit is rodents or other dogs. Carolyn Brown, DVM Vice President of Medicine, ASPCA Community Medicine, told Fox News in an email. According to Brown, leptospirosis can cause kidney or liver damage and sometimes even death from organ damage or organ failure. So, say this again. Leptospirosis is a bacterial disease that can affect animals and humans and is spread through the urine of infected animals. So, you have rats taking over New York City. It's just disgusting. You have humans peeing and defecating on the streets of New York City. And then you have dogs doing the same thing. And of course, dogs put everything in their mouth. That's what they do because they're dogs, right? And as a result, you have this spreading of disease. And the Democrats own this. They own this. And you have Joe Biden going to Baltimore City. But he's going to the port of Baltimore to see how the supply chain is working with all those ships in the Chesapeake Bay and nipping off their wares into the port of Baltimore so that trucks and trains can take the goods to market. But you know what he should do? He should really visit downtown Baltimore to see how bad it is. Just like New York City, where the rats are taking over. In Baltimore City, where you have the cancel the police politicians, the city has one of the highest murder rates in its history, if not the highest murder rate in its history, including children and women, people that aren't part of gangs, because they're in the crossfire and there's little opportunity. It is an utter gulag, a place where I grew up, but Biden isn't going to visit there. He should go visit Kim Klacik. She'll show him the really crummy areas of Baltimore City, which, by the way, make up enormous parts of that city. Enormous. I mean, the decay is unreal. You cannot believe how bad it is. And of course, Joe Biden will say it's because, well, we passed that infrastructure bill and that's going to fix the problem. I got news for you. Baltimore, while certainly there can be improvements in roads and bridges in Baltimore, there's no doubt about it. The reason why they've all gone to hell in Baltimore and other cities that are run by blue mayors and blue city councils is because they haven't managed the city properly for many decades. And if they did, everything would be in great shape. But no, this is all just an example of why the Democrats are so behind in the polls, and they refuse to go to the places where the real problems are actually located, like the inner cities and the cancel the police movement and the inflation and the fact that when they do lose, the Democrats, they can't even accept the fact that they've lost, like in the state of Virginia. Like, how is it possible that we lost? There must be something wrong with this. Let's go recount the absentee ballots and let's see if we can stick a few extra in there. Which, by the way, podcast listeners, is why I don't like absentee ballots and vote by mail, because that's exactly what you can do. Let's face it. You can easily do it. You just harvest you ballot harvest all of those ballots that were mailed out that hadn't been returned. You get enough of them and you just somehow sneak them in. You can't do that when you vote in person. But I digress. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. This is really an interesting one, by the way. This Go Woke or Go Broke is actually an opinion article in the Wall Street Journal. And this Go Woke or Go Broke is entitled, Why the Woke Can't Take a Joke. Guess who wrote this? Why the Woke Can't Take a Joke. Well, the person who wrote this is actually the guy who is the founder of the Babylon Bee. So his name is Kyle Mann. And at the end of the opinion article in the Wall Street Journal, it says, Mr. Mann is the editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee and a co-author of the Babylon Bee Guide to Wokeness. So I have to read this to you because it's pretty awesome. Again, it's by Kyle Mann, and he's the editor-in-chief there. And the article is Why the Woke Can't Take a Joke. The anti-Chappelle revolt at Netflix shows leftism's weakness. This is actually pretty cool. It is the test of a good religion whether you can joke about it. G.K. Chesterton observed more than 100 years ago. The laughing prophet, as he was known, pointed out that people who are secure in their beliefs need not fear mockery. It's those with shaky doctrines who can't tolerate laughter. Today's political radicals hold their views with the fervor of a religion, and by Chesterton's measure, they're rather weak creeds. As Dave Chappelle recently found out, mocking the left's dearly held dogma will provoke outrage and uproar, the likes of which would make the religious right of satanic panic fame look grounded and sane. You are allowed to make jokes, the left declares, as long as they target the right people. Or rather, the people the left thinks are wrong. Anyone in their congregation is off limits. But the recent dust-up over Mr. Chappelle only further demonstrates the true power of political satire and comedy. It can shine a light on the unflattering traits of those controlling our cultural institutions. Funny is funny, even in a time of political polarization and censorship. Comedy can get people of all stripes laughing and dole out a little truth while their guard is down. This is why, from the woke boardrooms to the White House and elite universities, those wielding cultural power today can't abide humor that illuminates their moral failures, their hypocrisy, and their ultimate bankruptcy of their worldviews. Jokes intended to provoke a good-natured laugh are now met with calls for censorship, boycotts, and even fact checks. Of course, he's referring to Babylon Bee being fact-checked by Facebook because people actually believed it was a true article. Satire in all its forms, from online satirical papers like the Babylon Bee and The Onion to the pre-Trump days of Stephen Colbert and John Oliver, is the little boy turning the world on its head by pointing out the emperor has no clothes. The kid isn't scheming to start a political revolution or even really telling a joke. He's dryly stating the obvious, not having yet learned the rules of polite society. The boy, in his childless innocence, has stumbled on another superpower of comedy. It unites people. It empowers them to speak up. It opens up closed hearts and minds to a new perspective. It reminds us that our leaders and those with an ironclad grip on our cultural centers are not imperial gods, but men naked in the cold. You can see then why they can abide only comedy that plays by their rules. Once a culture learns to laugh at its leaders, it's hard to scare them into silence. I love that line. Once a culture learns to laugh at its leaders, it's hard to scare them into silence. So they'll let you joke, all right. They'll let you joke about how great the emperor's outfit is and how beautiful the ceremony, and they'll especially appreciate it if you make fun of the crowd of peasants and their filthy garb. Just don't point out the obvious, or you could find yourself on the business end of a guillotine, or at least of a Netflix employee protest. And that is from Mr. Mann, who is editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee and the co-author of the Babylon Bee Guide to Wokeness. Pretty awesome. It's a really, really great read. And sometimes I have to read these things on Mark and the Millennials because it's not just the excellence of the writing itself, but the fact that these opinion pieces so well illuminate modern cultural America, where you have these elites who are incapable of laughing at themselves and have decided that comedy has to be speech policed. I mean, of all things, comedy, the one thing in our lives that should never, ever be speech policed. And the idea, podcast listeners, which I really love, is that once you learn how to laugh at your leaders, it's really hard for the leaders to turn back the clock and say, no more laughing at leaders. Because in Marxist societies in China, can you imagine if you put a joke out on social media about Xi, the president of China? Can you imagine what would happen to you? I mean, you'd be hauled off and jailed, maybe just disappear forever. That's not allowed there. You can't joke about the Chinese Communist Party leadership. You will pay the ultimate price. So in America, they can't dial back they're trying to. They, meaning the left, they're trying to dial back your ability to actually engage in comedy. And you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? And what other societies don't allow that to happen? And those societies are not places where you want to live. And we don't want to live in a society here in the United States of America where we can't laugh at our leaders. Or if we do laugh at our leaders, we will face the cancel culture elites telling us that they're going to put us into the guillotine where we can't ever earn money again. Brilliantly read article, fantastic article, Mr. Mann. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire, and it is pretty awesome. So the Duchess of Cornwall, so this is in England, obviously, met with Joe Biden at a climate summit last Monday. But the emissions she was left talking about had little to do with the environment, according to a new report. So, you might want to know what that means. Well, this is an even better article. That was, by the way, from the Gateway Pundit. Pretty funny. The Daily Mail, of course, based in England. Joe Biden Or the new Mr. Trump? Question mark. Camilla, I should say, hasn't stopped talking about hearing the President Biden, break wind during chat at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. So you have the President of the United States, who allegedly has done just that. I'm going to read part of this article, but it's because this is the English newspaper. This is from their perspective. He is supposed to be committed to reducing emissions. But when President Joe Biden produced a little natural gas of his own at the COP26 summit, it was audible enough to make the Duchess of Cornwall blush. An informed source has told the Mail on Sunday that Camilla was taken aback to hear Biden break wind as they made polite small talk at the global climate change gathering in Glasgow last week. It was long and loud and impossible to ignore, the source said. Camilla hasn't stopped talking about it. The president met the Duchess during a reception on Monday at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, attended by Prince Charles, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, and Boris Johnson. Just hours earlier, the 78-year-old, nicknamed Sleepy Joe by Donald Trump, this is the English newspaper, so it's pretty funny, had appeared to doze off during the opening address, prompting more questions from his political rivals over his fitness for office. So podcast listeners, he didn't appear to be dozing off. During the summit, everybody's sitting down and they have, of course, their earpieces in so that they can hear the translation of whoever the speaker is, depending if it's in English or not in English. And Joe Biden is there and he's clearly fallen asleep. And they have a clip on this. We don't have this clip because you would have to actually see it to believe it. It's worth seeing. It's on this particular newspaper website. He's there. He falls asleep and an aide comes over and wakes him up. Literally, like, Mr. President, it's time to wake up, like the speech is over. And, Biden wakes up and like, oh, okay, yeah, yay. I mean, it's that bad. So just hours earlier, the 78-year-old nicknamed Sleepy Joe by Donald Trump had dozed off. This is not the first time that Biden has faced claims that he broke wind. In May 2020, Republicans, including Donald Trump Jr., posted a video clip of Biden containing a suspicious noise while live streaming an exchange with Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf. So Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, in May 2020, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, this is during the election of 2020, Biden was in a streaming conversation with him because Pennsylvania was the most important state in the United States for the 2020 election. And back then, Biden also had the accent, except that back then it was actually recorded. And we have that clip, and here it is.
Or stop work on roads and bridges. So what does the human cost?
So you heard that noise. Let's play that again. One more. You have to hear it. It's at the very beginning of this clip, podcast listeners, as good old Joe Biden is talking to Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf. Here it is.
Or stop work on roads and bridges. So what does the human cost?
That's on video, and Biden kind of lifts up one side, when it happens. So it's pretty quite clear that this is happening. So, however, a separate video which circulated last month and was briefly trending on Twitter under hashtag Fartgate was found to have been doctored to include fake flatulence. But that one was not fake, by the way, with Tom Wolf. That was quite real. They're talking about the one with Camilla in England. Trump Sr. is considering running in the 2024 presidential race. After a year in the White House, Biden's approval ratings are at rock bottom, which polls putting his predecessor 2 percentage points ahead. At the reception, which was originally supposed to have been hosted by the Queen until she was ordered to rest by doctors, it's a good thing, Biden was seen laughing and joking with Prince William, at one stage placing a hand on his shoulder. At COP26, Biden apologized for Trump's action in taking the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, and he pledged that America would devote more resources to fighting climate change. Yeah, you might want to fight it himself. The president was gonged 8 times by organizers for running past the 3-minute allotted for speech. Jeez. Folks, this is in the Daily Mail in the English. I mean, how embarrassing. This is your president, okay? And you think for 1 minute there aren't people like Obama that are running the United States of America? Clearly, they're the ones who are running this country, not Biden. I mean, the man, he falls asleep. An aide has to wake him up. He farts in front of the royal family. And then they have to keep gonging him like, President Biden, you're like at the 5-minute mark and the 3-minute mark was 2 minutes ago. And they had to do it like several times. I mean, the man is an embarrassment. Well, that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.